Hey there, this is Derek Murphy. Publisher Rocket, which is an Amazon keyword research tool, just came out with an update. This is version 2.067, and I'm going to real quick walk you through these insight tabs, which are new. If you haven't used Publisher Rocket or any kind of keyword tool before, let me real quick show you why it's useful. So this is one of the books that I'm working on launching right now. And if you're publishing a book on Kindle Direct Publishing, which is Amazon's ebook platform, down here it's going to ask you to fill in your description of your book, your keywords, which are some random keywords related to your genre. I have different videos that talk more about keywords, and then your categories. You can choose up to 2 categories, but you can also request 8 more, up to 10 in total. And on your book's Amazon page, it will usually show you the top 2 that you're ranking in. So right now I'm actually ranking these 3. So it's showing me the top 3 out of all 10. Sometimes it's a little tricky to know which categories you are in. There's actually a free tool at Nerdy Book Girl where you can add in your ASIN or your book, and it'll tell you all the categories that your book is listed in. So if I enter my ASIN here and I press search, then it'll tell me that my book is already in all of these categories because I've requested to Amazon that I want to be in these categories. But before you ask, you have to know which categories are the best for your book. So a free and easy way to do it is to go down and look at all of the other competitors or other books that are in your genre, which takes some time and a bit of research. But I could look down here at the bottom of these other books and see which categories they are in, and then click on these categories, find more books, and start putting together a list. And to do really good keyword and category research, I would also want to click into my target categories. I would see the first book at number 1, probably the 50th book. The top 100 is what shows, so page 1 and 2, each page has 50 books. So if I knew the rank for number 1 and the rank for number 50 and probably the rank for number 100 also, I would know vaguely how many books I would need to sell to stay in the top 100. And that's actually what I'm doing right now. So bestsellers, teen and vampire fiction. I think I have 3 or 4 books of my vampire series that are in the top 100 of this category that I'm sustaining with ads. So here is book 1 at number 35, and then the other books are, down below, somewhere in the top 100. Like I said, you can do it for free, but Publisher Rocket is a keyword research tool that does a lot of stuff for you and just shows you the data faster so that it takes less time and you can be more precise about which categories you choose. So I went into the category search, I put in my keyword, which is vampire, and now I've got some of these categories that I can look at. And the really cool thing is some of these are really tiny categories that I could ask to be in, but they don't really fit my books. However, it only takes 1 sale to get here because these are such tiny categories, which is pretty crazy. So if I was in a small category that was relevant and really suited my book, that would mean that whenever I'm advertising my book or whenever my book shows up, I would have this number 1 bestseller tag if I was number 1 in a category, which can be a significant extra little boost that tells readers that your book is trustworthy and valuable. It's fun to hit number 1 for a few days when you're doing a promotion. It's very difficult to stick at number 1 all the time unless you're selling quite a bit of books. But here in Publisher Rocket, under the category search, it gives us some really fast information, how many sales it's going to take to get to number 1. So in the general paranormal vampires, which is a huge genre, it would take me 2,697 sales in order to get to the number 1 spot. And that's per day. So if you managed it in this category, you'd be making tons of money, but it'd be very, very difficult to sustain. You'd probably be spending a lot of money on advertisements. However, this one in mystery, thriller, suspense, paranormal vampires would only take 106 books a day, which is still a lot, but of course a lot less than 2,600. And then in this category, which is the one I'm actually trying to rank in, teen and young adult vampires, it would take 346 a day to stay at number 1. However, if I compare this one's sales to number 10, here it would only take me 14 sales a day to hit in the top 10 of the category, and here it would take 35 sales a day. So depending on whether, like, it's more difficult to get to number 1 here, but it's less difficult to stay in the top 10, which is pretty interesting. And the other cool thing is here is large publishers. So this category, teen young adult vampires, it says that it's mostly 80% large publishers. Not always, but typically large traditional publishers don't focus on Amazon. They may not be running Amazon ads. They may not be trying to stay competitive on the Amazon Kindle ecosystem, which means it may be easier to get ahead if you are advertising, if you are self-published or indie published, as opposed to maybe this category, which is mostly small publishers or mostly self-published or indie published. Typically, indie or self-publishers know how to use Amazon, or they're spending money on ads in a way that big publishers may not be. It also shows you how much of this is in Kindle Unlimited. And then over here we have an Insights tab, which is a brand new feature that only got added very recently this week to Publisher Rocket. These are not all, incidentally, these aren't all of the categories for Vampire. When I search for Kindle, these are the 4 that came up. But if I search for books, or if I just go to all, I'll get a lot more categories. I believe that it's probably going to show me all of the categories, but I wouldn't be surprised if it misses some. There are some other tools you can use to find more hidden categories. You want to find the categories that match your actual book audience the closest, so don't get too creative trying to find little categories. This one's activities, puzzles, and games. Even though, it'd be great to rank in this category and to get to number 1, this is really not the right category for my young adult vampire fantasy novels. And since I'm really not trying to hit and stay at number 1 forever, I'm much more interested in this sales to number 10, because something like this one, which I'm not sure if I'm in right now, would only take 11 sales a day to stick in the top 10. What I want is to stay visible in the top 100 of all of my categories for as long as possible. Hopefully to find some sustainable ads to keep the rank high enough that I stay visible. If you're not in the top 100 of your categories, you're quickly going to start dropping off and you won't have the visibility, so you won't have new sales coming in. There's a lot of really useful tools in Publisher Rocket. It's also useful for keyword research. If I just type vampire, for example, it'll give me a big list of keywords that I could put into Amazon's KDP advertising platform. It might give me some clues for targets I could put on Facebook ads as well, or even just some general keywords that I could put in my description or my subtitle. But I want to play around with this new Insights tab. So if I click on any of these insights, it's going to give me really specific information about this particular category. So some of this is the same information that we saw on this last page, which is just kind of a simplified version. But let's say I am interested in this category and I click on Insights. It tells me the sales to number 1, the sales to number 10. It also tells me the average page count. So this is 601. That's pretty crazy for a book, but this is probably a lot of box sets. So it's averaging single standalone novels, which are generally around 200 or 300 pages, with box sets, which are generally 3 or 4 or 5 books together in a collection, which could be like 800 pages or 1,000 pages. That's why this average page count is so high. It gives me an average star rating, average age, which is how long the book has been in the category. So this is also kind of interesting because some categories, if this number was smaller, it would mean there's a lot of churn or a lot of turnover. So the top 100 books in this category would be replaced by new books that are being published that are pushing everything else down. So there's a lot of new releases in this category. It might be harder to stay there for a long time. I'd probably prefer a category where the average age is longer, assuming that my books are good enough to try to stick long term. It also gives me an an indication of the average indie price and the average publishing price. So this would just be independent or small publishers versus large publishers, which is a little weird because generally average, like real publishers, large publishers tend to price their ebooks really high, like $9.99. Indies tend to be a lot lower, so it's a little weird to see this price being lower. The other really interesting thing is this category growth. So for this specific category, the books that are in this category are not working as well or not selling as much as books in other categories. Whether this is just, how books are being filtered in different categories or whether it represents reader interest, it's a little bit unclear. It's probably worth testing whether, because this category is on a decline, maybe if you have a good book and you promote it hard, it would be easier to push your book to the top of this category because it's less competitive. On the other hand, I would be really tempted to try to stick with categories that show significant growth, assuming that, those are the books that are being found and bought by readers. So down here is my actual target category. I'm going to look in that one. Here you can see a more standard difference, I think, with the average indie price being $4.50 and the average pub price being $10.50, which is more of a normal split. Generally, indies price lower. This one also has a much longer average age of 2,000 days, which is like 6 years, which on the one hand means that these books stick for a long time. On the other hand, it's probably the same books from 6 years ago. Like these are the big major, traditionally published or self-published books that are selling hundreds of thousands of copies, which are still popular years later. So just because it has an average age that's really long, it doesn't necessarily mean I can get ahead by publishing a new book, because all the top spots are filled with older books that have had a lot more time to build up relevancy and traction on Amazon. This category is also showing a really significant decline, much bigger than the last one we looked at. Another way of searching with Publisher Rocket is to go into Competition Analyzer, type in my keyword, which was vampire, and then it gives me this list of best-selling books that show up when you search for vampire on Amazon. So these would be books and author names that I would want to target in Amazon ads. And I can also see pretty quickly some general statistics about their books, how many page reads they have, how many pages the books have, their earnings per month, daily sales, monthly sales, and price. But I can also go into the categories of each of these. So I could really quickly go to competition, search for vampire, get this list of best-selling books, and then click into the categories to see which categories they are ranking in. So it's interesting, actually, this one that's a vampire book is ranking in fantasy and epic fantasy, not necessarily in the vampire categories, which I believe is better because it will show you the categories you're ranking the best in, and these are both much larger, broader categories, so it means they're selling more books per day to stick in these categories. It looks like 126 sales per day for them to hold these ranks. Also, if I do the competition analyzer with the keyword search for vampire and I get all of these books, I can also just hit unleash the categories and it will give me all of the categories for all of these books that are selling really well for the term vampire. So that's another way to find some less obvious categories that might be well suited for your book. This time I tried just searching for fantasy, which is a much bigger category. This time there's a lot of data and a lot of different categories, so I might want to filter this a little bit. Like I said, I'm not super interested in sales to number one, but it is helpful to organize it this way. So these are all the ones that would only take one sale to rank in that category. So if I found any that were a good fit, it's probably worth putting in some of those low ranking ones. Doesn't necessarily help you unless you keep the number one slot and you keep that bestseller tag. That can help a little bit. Otherwise, staying in the top 10 or the top 100 of a really tiny, obscure category that doesn't have a lot of readers anyway may not actually help you. And you may want to be in some much larger, broader categories as well. However, then you're really never going to show up in those categories because most people will filter by either a direct keyword search or they'll browse through the categories and then they'll only see the top 100 bestsellers at a time. Since I am more interested in the sales to number 1, I might click on this one. And the interesting thing here, under fantasy sales to number 10, there's a bunch of these foreign language Italian fantasy fiction, Italian, German, French. So I've been thinking about doing translations of my books. I'm not exactly sure, but I don't think these are the foreign language Kindle stores. I don't think this is the Italian Kindle store or the German or the French. I think this is the normal standard USA, depending on which store you're targeting. Each country has a separate store that are not really merged. I think these would be the normal USA store, but it would be the foreign language section, which means it's possible if I had a foreign language version of my book and I put it in these categories, I could hit number 1 pretty easily. However, that wouldn't really be the right spot either, because if it was the USA American store and these foreign language editions, that would really be a small readership of people who use the US store but also shop in the foreign language, as opposed to just publishing in the Italy store or the French store. But here's a good one that's teen, young adult, science fiction and fantasy, alternative history. That could fit a few of my books. I'd want to click on the link to check that category out and just make sure that my books would actually fit here. So the other things about the thing about categories is if my book was in one of these, are these other books in this category the type of books that I would want to see in my also bots? Will it help Amazon decide who should see my books and who will most likely buy my books? So it's not only about getting the visibility and trying to stay in the top 100, that you also want to make sure you're in the right category and that you are your covers and your books look like they belong in that category. So going back to my vampire example, the book covers that I made for this series fit in pretty well with the layout and the fonts and the color schemes of the other best-selling books that are in this category. And the other best-selling books that are in this category, they share the right type of audience. They're the right type of books for the audience who's browsing this category, which means they're going to be more likely to convert and to find the right readers. So if I wanted to be in this alternate history one, I would want to make sure that my books look like they might fit in this particular category. My vampire books obviously don't, but I have a few other books that might. Here's another surprising one. Kindle books, teen young adult, fantasy, paranormal and urban mermaids is I only need one sale to get to the top 10 and 19 sales per day to get to number 1. This is something that's pretty achievable for my mermaid book. So if I'm not in this category already, then I should be. If I was running hard ads on my mermaid fantasy book, I could probably hold on to that number 1 slot. And here's another interesting one that's teen, young adult, science fiction and fantasy, science fiction, mysteries. So for whatever reason, that's sort of a weird category where it's science fiction and then the extra little bit that's mysteries. But if you had the right type of book that fit in that category, it would only take you 1 sale a day to stay in the top 10. With a little bit of advertising, you could probably get that 1 sale, which means you'd probably keep the visibility. And the trick with publishing on KDP is to be able to advertise or promote your books profitably long term so that you can stick in the ranks long enough to build up the data so that Amazon knows who to show your books to. These are some pretty interesting new features. I do really like this insight button because it gives us just a little bit more info than we've seen in the past. Publisher Rocket is a paid tool. I think it's about $100, but it's not a monthly fee, which means unlike a lot of other competitors, you just have to buy it once and it pays for itself over and over again. You probably won't use it a lot or all the time, but the first time you publish any new book, you'll probably do a lot of research to make sure you set up your book the right way and you put it in the right categories and the right keywords. You could do all that stuff for free, poking around Amazon, but you won't really know, you won't have access to all of this information and all the data. So even if you kind of guess what might be right for your category, you're not going to get as good results as you would if you used a tool like this to do more detailed research. So that's all I've got for right now. I'll leave a link down below if you want to check out Publisher Rocket. If you do use my link, I'll give you a free marketing course as well. Just send me an email with a picture of your purchase. Thanks a lot. Bye.